You got it, lady. Yo, a love bomb, baby. Come and blow me away.
This is the worst.
Welcome into the worst fantasy show. I am your host with the least, Jack Lucenay. We are coming in pre-recorded because by the time this is airing, I will be in Canton, Ohio at the Fantasy Football Expo, having a great time partying my face off with all kinds of other fantasy football content creators in the space and a bunch of fans. So if you guys have never had the opportunity, I would recommend Canton, Ohio Fantasy Football Expo 2025. Start planning your trips. But we will get right into things. Last week was the players we hate. This week, baby, we're showing the love. So we are going to basically be taking a look again at the draft board. This is an automized draft board on Sleeper, basically just showing ADP in a draft board format. I did it basically, like I said, auto drafted all the way through. Just to kind of get a sense of how the rounds look. At the same time, I have on my phone here the best ball rankings for Underdog. So we will be taking a look again at the first 10 rounds and all the players that I love to draft this time. So, spending a little bit more time on the positivity train. And basically all of the first round picks except for Justin Jefferson, and even Justin Jefferson to a degree, it's hard to hate on them. They're first round picks for a reason. I think Puka Nacua will obviously drop, but my favorite of all of them, Bijan Robinson, I think is going to be an absolute monster this season. The coach, you see here, it says Bijan Robinson could be in a timeshare. I completely disregard that. The coach talked about when he took over, and you can even see it here that because they're talking about what Zach Robinson said, the offensive coordinator, but Raheem Morris has already said that Bijan Robinson is going to have the primary touches in that CMC role. That doesn't mean that Tyler Allgeier won't mix in. We see it all the time with the 49ers and the way that the 49ers run their system. We've seen that, Christian McCaffrey gets the large majority of the touches, but they still work in Elijah Mitchell and those backup running backs. So I really don't care if they involve Tyler Allgeier. To me, Bijan Robinson, Bijan and Breece Hall, two of my favorite targets in the first round because they're the only running backs I see that could potentially max out at Christian McCaffrey levels of value. And if that happens, it breaks fantasy, especially in any kind of PPR formats or formats that give bonus points for first downs. Like Christian McCaffrey, for example, in the Scott Fishbowl scoring last year, scored like 470 fantasy points. Even CeeDee Lamb and Tyreek Hill, both who had like 1,800 receiving yards, so outlandish wide receiver seasons, they were, I think, at like a little over 400. So here, let me vet that actually. But it was a pretty big disparity just between the running back and the wide receiver. But then on top of it, I keep hammering this. It's not just the difference between the running back and the wide receiver. It's the difference between that top performing running back and the jabronis that kind of fall off to the bottom. So let's just take a look here. I really just want to see what the scoring was for, in particular, CeeDee Lamb and Tyreek Hill last season. And Scott Fish. Okay, so yeah, Tyreek had 415 fantasy points. CD Lamb, who was your number one, had 446 fantasy points on again, outlandish 135 receptions, 1,749 yards, 12 touchdowns. And then meanwhile, Christian McCaffrey had 476 fantasy points. So it wasn't just that he had, again, more than the wide receivers. It's that, your average wide receivers like your Adam Thielens and your Tyler Lockett's of the world are still putting up like 200 fantasy point seasons. Whereas, you get down to like fucking Ty Chandler, Jalen Wright, J.K. Dobbins, Kendra Miller, Chuba Hubbard range. Like it's going to be such a hit or miss. And when it's a miss, the guys who are sub 100 fantasy points, now you're talking about a difference of over 350 fantasy points between CMC and those players. And yeah, there's only one CMC, but again, we're trying to project who could potentially jump up into that range of being a 400 fantasy point producer in a Scott Fishbowl type scoring format. And again, just to repeat, Bijan Robinson and then Breece Hall. I also see that path for Breece Hall. I really love Jahmyr Gibbs. I just want to show some love to Jahmyr Gibbs because I love that pick. See, I love all the running backs in this range is really what it is. Well, like, especially as compared to the wide receivers. Like, I have questions about Garrett Wilson because of Aaron Rodgers and his ability to stay healthy. I have questions about Devontae Adams because of the offense and his age. I have questions about Marvin Harrison Jr. because he's a rookie. I have questions about Drake London because he's never done it and we're hoping that with the upgraded quarterback and Kirk Cousins and the new scheme that he will latch on and produce at this ADP. Chris Olave, I think his ceiling is capped by the virtue of being in New Orleans. Brandon Ayuk, seemingly on the trade block. Who knows where he ends up now? Nico Collins, a part of that three-headed monster in Houston, really makes me nervous. So I look at some of those wide receivers, and then I look at Jahmyr Gibbs, Travis Etienne, Saquon Barkley, and Kyren Williams. I think Kyren, for obvious reasons, because of the draft capital invested in him, because there is going to be a bit of a changing of the guard with the Rams because they did lose a lot of their coaching staff, which are now in Atlanta. Sean McVay stayed, but we'll see kind of if things change under Sean McVay with the rest of the new staff. I'm very bullish on Saquon Barkley. He's probably the one that I love the most here. I think there are some people who are afraid of him because of the tush push. But when I look at Saquon Barkley and his career and what he's been able to do specifically, like, in New York, dealing with that bum offense and what he could potentially do for the Eagles, I think Saquon is a smash pick, still only 27 years old. And really profiled as the kind of guy that, if he was a quarterback, he would be leading your team. And I think that's underrated for him landing with the Philadelphia Eagles, who kind of imploded down the stretch last season. And I think Saquon significantly better at breaking tackles and ankles than a DeAndre Swift, who is more of a one-cut runner. Although Swift is very athletic, definitely not the same lateral agility as a Saquon, the ability to make people miss. And ETN pretty much, again, even if Tank Bigsby is involved, I think people need to get over the fact that there's always going to be a second running back involved. But if that second running back is only getting, 100 to 150 carries, that's very normal for a backup running back. Like, you do not want to run the ball. If you're in a team that's going to run the ball 400 to 450 times, you don't want that to be all one guy nowadays. Like 300 carries, and I'm talking about just carries alone. 300 carries is a lot in today's day and age for fantasy football. And I think when I look at a guy like ETN, Gibbs, Saquon, and even Kyren, they all have receiving ability out of the backfield. And I think that's important as well. The thing about Kyren too, just to kind of encapsulate, it's a lot easier to cover Kyren than, Marvin Harrison Jr. or Chris Olave, because if those picks don't work out, it's not like there's a guy behind that you can get later that's just going to pop into the role of a Marvin Harrison Jr. Whereas I see that with Kyren Williams and obviously Blake Corum, who you can get much later in the draft, going all the way down to the 10th round here. You could get him as a handcuff. Even so, if you could have taken him at 10-5. Again, this was an automized draft board, but just to look at where he went at 10-9. So he was available at 10-5 to handcuff with Kyren Williams and really just lock up that Rams backfield. But again, we're kind of assuming that, Zach Robinson and Raheem Morris and the departure of the rest of that Rams staff isn't really going to affect the Rams offense, and we shall see. I know Sean McVay is, again, the brainchild, but when you lose your entire staff like that, it could potentially affect things there. I kind of missed it last time about Josh Allen on the hate episode, and we're not going to get into it because this isn't the hate episode, but there are so many quarterbacks that I love late, and I am projecting some regression for Josh Allen, that really the quarterbacks in terms of the elite range that I'm very comfortable and in love with drafting still, they're actually over here, Jalen Hurts and Patrick Mahomes. I think Patrick Mahomes, when you add Xavier Worthy and Hollywood Brown on the outside and you give him back that speed and potentially open things up in the middle for Travis Kelce.
Come on, baby. Come on. Come on. Come on. Yes. Hey, it worked. All right. Easy money. Come on.
So I think Mahomes has a bounce back here. And then Jalen Hurts, even if I think kind of the opposite of what I view with Josh Allen, where I see Josh Allen regressing in the passing game, I think Jalen Hurts is still very much ascending. I don't think he has hit his ceiling in the passing game. And I think part of the implosion last season was because that part of his game really didn't elevate down the stretch. And I think this season, it'll be very interesting to see, especially with the adaptation of if they're using less tush push because Jason Kelce's not there, if maybe we see that step forward with Jalen Hurts' passing ability. But I think the rushing floor will always be there. And when I look at the weapons like A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, and even some of the rookies that they added kind of in the back end, like Inez Smith that I like, or the really tall guy, I think it's Johnny Wilson is his name. And then, as much as I don't appreciate him, Dallas Goedert is still there. And you now add Saquon coming out of the backfield, who, again, very capable in the passing game. I'm very enamored with Jalen Hurts. I think they're the best team in the division. And so I'm still willing to bet on Jalen Hurts. And you get him a full round later than Josh Allen right now. So I'm still in love with those guys. But then the tight end range. I think this is the range of tight ends that I mostly live in. And it's because as much as I love Sam Laporta and I love Travis Kelce, I just think that Trey McBride, Mark Andrews, Dalton Kincaid, and even George Kittle, potentially because of the Brock Purdy connection, and Kyle Pitts. I know Kyle Pitts, there was nobody more out on Kyle Pitts last season than me. I made my bones last season on having a segment. If you guys want to go ever back and watch it, I clipped some shorts from it, but I had a segment last year. It fed us all year last season. It was who scored more than Kyle Pitts this week, to the point that I even had a fucking poem by the end of the year, because there was a week where it was so bad that like literally every jabroni in the league scored more points than Kyle Pitts. So there was no one more against Kyle Pitts last season. But again, with the exodus of Arthur Smith, with the incoming new coaching staff, with Kirk Cousins, I'm not going to lie, I'm back in on Kyle Pitts at that ADP going at 5'10 after all of those main tight ends. If you miss out on what I view as the big five in Laporta, Kelsey, McBride, Andrews, Kincaid, I think Kittle and Pitts are very capable options to grab right after that. I also love Evan Ingram. I've kind of cooled on Brock Bowers. I really like Brock Bowers as a player and a person. I just don't think it's going to happen for fantasy necessarily. And so I've started backing off of that, especially because I super love Jake Ferguson and David Njoku. And then it's a fucking drop off. Like, you can try fucking around with Goddard and Hawkinson. Hawkinson coming back from injured. Goddard, the most mid man that's ever lived. You know, I'm a big fan of Freiermuth, but that's scary too with that Arthur Smith system. You got to hope he fits into that. So I think there's a really big drop off at tight end talent after the David Njoku, Jake Ferguson range. And I've kind of seen those guys flip. I've seen it where Ferguson goes ahead. I've seen it where Njoku goes ahead. In any case, to me, the real tight end drop off is after those two players. And so you really want to make sure that you snort up all your tight ends before that.
I said, "Hot damn."
So we're kind of all over the board here a little bit. We're going to rein it in just a little bit. Let's go back up to the fourth round here. Trey McBride. And then Cooper Kupp. I think Cooper Kupp obviously is going to be rising on a lot of draft boards, especially with the news, unfortunately, with Puka's knee. Cooper Kupp still being viewed as the one in this offense. Alvin Kamara. That's a pick that I love because that's a Mr. Utility pick if there's ever been one. Like, there just is not a scenario, unfortunately, where I envision Kendre Miller or Jamal Williams actually taking over the job from Kamara. He's still an extremely talented player. I think what he does in the passing game is second to none. So I love the value. It's still a tremendous value in the fifth. Last year we got value on Kamara because of the suspension. And this year I think, yeah, there was some regression, but I think it's overrated how much of that regression came from Kamara personally, and the fact that it was just a suck-ass team with a suck-ass offense and a suck-ass coach. And I don't think that changed this year, so it's not like I'm expecting him to do that much more. But, like, people who say shit like, oh, Kamara's washed, or, you know, like he's on the downtrend, like, I think that is a little bit exaggerated. So we talked about the tight end range. Amari Cooper and George Pickens. So these are two guys, again, justifying the reason that I have often found myself taking my running backs early and waiting on wide receiver this year is because the wide receivers are so fucking deep. And I look at Amari Cooper going in the fifth round, who has only had back-to-back 200 fantasy point seasons. Now, I can understand if you want to argue about like the consistency in like a redraft format, but in best ball, again, it's automatic from Amari Cooper. George Pickens, even if Brandon Ayuk were to land there, Pickens is still going to have a role as like the primary wide receiver on the outside for the Steelers. I think, you know, Ayuk would actually make things even easier for Pickens because now he's not going to be the primary focus of the defense. So I actually wouldn't even hate if Ayuk went there. But then, you know, I look at Chris Godwin going at 6'12", Christian Kirk at 6'2". I look at Calvin Ridley at 7'11". I look at Hollywood Brown with Spike Weeks going at 7'7". So these are all wide receivers in these middle ranges that I absolutely love. And it's because they're allowing me to take the shots on the running backs that I really want earlier. So if I wanted to go, you know, the person here who went Breece Hall, Travis Etienne, and then even Mahomes and Pitts, they only got one wide receiver in Neighbors. Again, this is the computer, right? But assuming like they could have gone with, a Terry McLaurin here, or a Chris Godwin, or a Jaden Reed, a Calvin Ridley, a DeAndre Hopkins, those Brian Thomas Jr., those types of players that offer either, the kind of consistency that you get from the veterans, where it's like maybe the ceiling isn't necessarily there for them to now ascend into a 300 fantasy point season, but they're always going to just produce the 200 fantasy points over and over and over. You load up on those guys because, again, the disparity, the difference between an Amari Cooper and a CeeDee Lamb is less than the difference between a CMC and a DeAndre Swift going in the same range, or a David Montgomery going in the same range. Again, that gap is much wider for the running backs than it is for the wide receivers. So that's also where it's coming from a little bit. But we're in the middle rounds. We will continue right after this 30-second dance party.
30-second dance party.
This is how we party.
All right. So looking at some of the guys that are in this 7th to 8th round range, there's one in particular that, he really hurt me last year, but I'm starting to come back around.
Somewhere deep down in my heart, I still love you.
And so there's actually two guys. For me, the one that hurt me the most last year, though, is Najee Harris. It is unquestionably Najee Harris. I've said on a couple shows now, I've said it on Underdog threads. I'll keep saying it. Arthur Smith was brought in essentially to revamp the power run offense of the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is what Arthur Smith does. He runs the highest 2 tight end sets in the NFL. They're often power sets out of single back formation. These are excellent for Najee Harris. The reason Najee struggled last season was because of the shotgun formations that he was forced to run out of for Matt Canada. That's much more of Jaylen Warren's speciality. It's why Jaylen Warren looks so much better than Najee Harris last season. This year, it's going to be flipped. And this isn't to say that Jaylen Warren's not going to be involved or that Jaylen Warren is going to suck. Jaylen Warren is just going to be involved on those auxiliary plays when we are out of shotgun and when we are in passing down formation. I think Jaylen Warren will be involved, but Najee Harris is going to get the bulk of the work. And he's never been under 1,000 yards. I think he's very underrated. I think he's a bit of a throwback, and so that's why people don't really kind of view him as a potentially elite running back. But I think, with the right offense and with how much we pumped into this offensive line, would not shock me at all to see Najee clear 1,200 rushing yards this season and maybe pound in like 8 to 10 rushing touchdowns. I think he's wildly going to surpass the ADP. And I think Jaylen Warren will not. I think Jaylen Warren will be relegated to that secondary role. And I think it really will be Najee Harris's, backfield. And similarly, I think another guy that burned people last season and is in a shared backfield, or people perceive it to be, Tony Pollard. Shout out to my guy, Big Draft Energy, aka Disco, who I will be meeting at the Fantasy Football Expo. I was kind of out on Tony Pollard, to be perfectly honest, but he was the one that kind of turned me around on it. And it's funny because I still feel like I need to do a deeper dive on the Tennessee Titans coaching staff. However, I will say this: Tony Pollard should be healthier this season. He was paid and brought in to essentially be the lead back. I'm not a big believer in Tyjae Spears. I think Tyjae Spears is a nice ancillary player. I do not think that he is going to lead this team as a bell cow running back of any kind of sort. I do think Tony Pollard ends up with, if they're in a 60-40 split, I think Tony Pollard ends up with the 60. But I think Pollard could have a nice season. I think Pollard, what he needs is a lot of outside zone runs. He is most efficient in running outside zone run scheme. That's why I was very nervous about him, especially last year going into the season. I was very out on Tony Pollard because the way that they were running the run scheme in Dallas last season was a lot of up the middle stuff, and that's not really Pollard's game. So I think Pollard has a chance to rebound again, not just from a health standpoint, but depending on what the coaching staff is going to set up. If they're running outside zone schemes specifically, I would be even more in on Tony Pollard. And then again, I look at some of these wide receivers that go late. Now, Lad McConkey. I am a known Lad truther. I've got a ongoing bet with shout out to my guy at HoofTube, another guy that I'll be meeting at the Fantasy Football Expo. But Lad McConkey, he is just an absolute stud. I think just when I watch him in and I know it's just training camps and like at the draft and stuff, and it's not necessarily in paths, but his route running, his touch and receiving with the ball, it's next level. And he's already been running with the ones primarily out of the slot, which is a lot of what Keenan Allen excelled at. And I think, and now he has dealt with a little bit of injuries through the training camp. That does make one a little bit nervous whenever the injuries start popping up, especially for a wide receiver a little bit on the smaller side. However, I still think that Lad McConkey is going to lead this team in receptions, yards. The only one I'm not sure about is touchdown, but definitely in receptions and yards. I think even in targets. I think he's just going to be a monster out of the slot. And I also like Brian Thomas Jr. on the other flip end of this as a rookie wide receiver. I think him, I definitely prefer as a best ball receiver, though I'm starting to come around to it in redraft because I think the potential for a Brian Thomas Jr. to have a monster rookie season does exist. There is a scenario where he walks in ahead of Gabe Davis and ahead of Christian Kirk, honestly, even as the primary wide receiver, with kind of Christian Kirk being that secondary role who works out of the slot and having Gabe Davis on the other side. I think he could really have like a monster. Like I'm talking like a 1,200-yard, 8-touchdown season, especially if Trevor Lawrence were to like progress at all, because he was supposed to be like a golden boy, and it feels like he hasn't super advanced even to where he should be. But also in this range is where we start seeing a lot of my favorite quarterbacks. And again, this is the reason that I'm waiting on quarterback. So jumping back a little bit, Kyler Murray, I think that's a slam dunk. Jordan Love, slam dunk. Even if you want to look at, I think Tua and Jared Goff, again, slam dunk.
Do you want to see me dunk?
Sure.
Yeah? Okay. Are you guys ready? I'm okay. No, don't worry.
Does that always happen?
So with Kyler Murray, obviously you get the rushing upside. With Jordan Love, it's just about the offense. But again, I look at 2-round discount. Tua going at the 9-12. I look at Jared Goff going at 10-2. Tua has arguably one of the best offenses in the entire NFL. They have Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. You now add Jonnu Smith, who is an excellent blocker. I think that's underrated what he can do in the blocking schemes. and also can be a competent tight end in the receiving game. I also love how they added Malik Washington and Jalen Wright, because now in a scenario where if for some reason Devon Achane or Raheem Mostert were to get injured, you still have another electric running back. And it's the same thing with Malik Washington. I think Malik Washington being underrated. I've taken him a lot in the last rounds of my best ball drafts, especially because he is a player that was targeted specifically by Mike McDaniel. And he profiles kind of similarly to like a Tyreek Hill light. So again, if you have him in the slot, or even kind of mixing in on the outside and pushing Jalen Waddle into the slot, like you just have so much speed on this team, and all it takes, especially in a best ball format, for a guy like Malik Washington is to pop a couple long ones and you're laughing. So I really love Malik Washington, but overall, I really love Tua Tagovaoila, who last year led the league in passing yards. I think could repeat that, but also could see those touchdowns come up a little bit. And Jared Goff has an immaculate opening schedule, an ascending young team, a locked-in wide receiver one, a locked-in running back one who could potentially be even better this year, and arguably one of the best tight ends in the game, like a great offensive line. Oh, and by the way, they're going to play in like a dozen dome games this year. So to me, Jared Goff, if I waited until the 10th round and I got Jared Goff as my QB1 and I can just, stream the QB2 position on like, his bye, or on the rare occasion where I feel like he actually has a bad matchup or in case of injury or something, like, and that's the thing. Goff's been so consistent because they keep him upright that he's always healthy. He's available all the time. So again, I love Jared Goff. I'm totally fine with him as my QB1, to the point that in a super flex league that I'm in, now the rules are a little different because you can't keep your first 5 round picks. So I can't keep Justin Herbert, but I can keep Jared Goff, and I'm keeping Jared Goff because I feel the quarterbacks are going to go off the board really heavy. And in a super flex league, I'm fine streaming that second quarterback and or waiting even and picking up the lottery ticket on like the Justin Fields, Russell Wilson duo pack. But to solidify that quarterback one spot, Jared Goff, absolutely. And also the way that I'm looking at the way the draft board will fall to me, I'll have the potential to maybe get the Amon-Ra Jared Goff stack. So that just makes it that much nicer. Justin Herbert, even though he's dealing with his own injury as well, I mean, the ADP is just so far down this year. And, even with the cacophony of wide receivers that they have, the Meshuggah grouping of wide receivers, except for my boy Ladd, I still think that Justin Herbert could be better than the sum of the parts. So I still really like him down here. And then just kind of let's quick fire some of these last guys that I love, and let's get out of here a little bit early today.
Thanks, Jamal. None this guy.
This is just like social media. The positivity never lasts as long or goes as hard as the negativity does, right? But no, it is because I have to record a couple more episodes for some other shows. I still have some cleaning and packing to do. Also, that I can enjoy myself this week at the Fantasy Football Expo 2024 being held in Canton, Ohio. I am extremely very excited. I won't be doing any kind of work for my channel either, so I'll just be going purely as a fan. So I'm really excited to have like the time off and have some fun. But yeah, let's just quick fire some of these guys in these last rounds that I really, really love. Deontay Johnson, love him. Devin Singletary, really love him. Devin Singletary last year was very underrated for the Texans. It's kind of the only game in town, and basically finds himself in the exact situation with the New York Giants. I love, we already talked about the tight ends in this range. You know what? JSN, hey, I love you at 9.9. I'd be willing to take that shot. Zeke, gross as it is, I don't envision Rico Dowdle or any of these other running backs as actually being able to take the job. I think they're going to end up just going with Zeke, and it's going to be really gross, but valuable for fantasy. He's going to outperform the ADP, so I don't hate it. Jerome Ford, my head's kind of blocking it here. Let's just go with the screen here so you guys can see. Jerome Ford at 11.1. Tyler Lockett at 11.2. Just always going to return value. Curtis Samuel at 11.3. He fits into Joe Brady's offense. He's familiar with it. He's worked with them before. So I think he's just going to end up being kind of grossly valuable. And so I have taken shots on him. Same thing with Khalil Shakir. It's like it's going to be one or the other, but I think it's actually more likely to be Curtis Samuel. Rashid Shaheed, I really like. Also, Zach Charbonnet is one that I've really been keeping my eye on, especially with the change in coaching in Seattle. I don't know that they are as enamored with Kenneth Walker as the previous coaching staff. And so I could see a world where it flips and Zach Charbonnet is able to take over as the primary running back. And so I've definitely been taking my late lottery pick shares of him. You know what? The only other guy I'll talk about here is Dontavian Wicks. Just because when it gets this late and I'm looking at Green Bay wide receivers who could potentially ascend the depth chart, I don't think it's going to be something that's going to be really valuable for you like week 1. But I think Wicks is a valuable piece to hold on to through preseason, through training camp preseason, and maybe for like the first week or two, just to kind of really see how the depth chart shakes out, and also kind of to see if there are any unfortunate injuries that pop up, because we've seen that plenty of times with these Green Bay wide receivers. So he's someone that I've definitely taken some late shots on as well. So that is it for me today. Again, I am descending upon America for the Fantasy Football Expo. There's going to be all kinds of great content and amazing stuff coming out of there. So keep your eyes peeled. Go follow at FF Expo on Twitter. And if you guys want to help me out, you can always super kick that subscribe and like and all that algorithmic BS. But until the next time, which will hopefully be back actually live shows, and we'll be pushing a 3 a week pretty soon enough after the Expo. But until then, we'll catch you on the flip side.
He's running down the middle by the 50. He's at the 30. He's bare-chested and banging his chest. Now he runs the opposite way. He runs at the 50. He runs at the 40. The guy is drunk, but there he goes. The 20. They're chasing him. They're not going to get him. Waving his arms, bare-chested. Somebody stop that man. Here comes